Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this week's video, I'll be making some vintage inspired Halloween decor. For the first project, I'll be making a spooky house. I'm using a paper mache house that I purchased at Hobby Lobby and some resin molds. I'll have the names of the molds in the description box below. I made 3 resin frames for the top windows and the door. I also made small resin pieces of some of the elements in the IOD Hidden Hollow mold and used hot glue to attach them. I then gave it only 1 coat of gray chalk paint so the paint would look a little worn. After I painted the top section, I decided it needed a bit more decoration, so I used some air dry clay and made 2 small windows from one of the door molds and glued them to the peaks. Next, I put a little bit of baking soda into the gray paint to make a thicker paint mixture so I could give the house some texture in different places. After the paint was dry, I made a small hole in the back and inserted a string of fairy lights. I used tape and hot glue to attach them. Next, I cut small pieces of vellum paper to cover the windows. I just used hot glue to attach it. I thought the roof should have some texture, so I used large popsicle sticks that I cut into smaller pieces and used as shingles. I used hot glue to attach them and left some open spaces to simulate a decaying rooftop. Once I had all the shingles on, I used some texture paste on the chimney and along the roof ridges. You could also use spackle instead of the texture paste. When the texture paste was dry, I painted the entire roof a dark brown. Next, I use black wax on the door, chimney, and the areas on the house where I put the gray texture paint. I then use Pentart's gold antique paste to highlight the door and window frames. To make a fence, I glued small wood picks together and then glued it to the bottom front. To finish it, I glued on a small branch and some moss around the bottom. For my next project, I'm going to use some wooden spools and air dry clay to make some ornaments. I started by using some antique wax and staining the spools. Next, I took a small styrofoam ball and covered it with air dry clay, then used more clay to make a stem. I used a little bit of glue and a clay tool to attach it. To make the face, I used a glue stick to make an indent for the eyes and my clay tools to make the nose and mouth. After covering the second pumpkin, I used more clay and rolled it into a cone shape for a hat. I then rolled a small piece of clay into a skinny snake shape and glued it in place for a hat brim. Again, I'm using my clay tools and water to blend the clay together where it meets. For the face, I'm using a pencil eraser that I cut into a triangle shape to make the eyes. I use the clay tools to make the nose and mouth. I also poked a hole in the top so I could attach a piece of wire later, and I set them aside to dry overnight. After they were dry, I painted them and then used some antiquing wax to give them an aged appearance. My granddaughter was watching me paint these and she said they were beautiful, like a cake pop. Next, I glued some baker's twine around both spools and then glued my pumpkin heads to the top of the spools. To finish them, I used some eyelash yarn around the top and then some tulle and ribbon to embellish the front. I also added a bit of Halloween ephemera and then glued a piece of curled wire on the top. For my next ornament, I'm starting with a small wood round. I painted it white, and when the paint was dry, I added Pentart's two-step crackle to it. When the crackle was dry, I used DIY brand black wax on it to highlight the crackle. Next, I used some crepe paper and made a ruffle and glued it to the back of the wood round. I then added the eyelash yarn around the outside of the wood round using hot glue. I also added some ribbon tails to the back and then glued a Holtz Halloween Cameo to the center of the round, and then glued some tulle and ribbon to the top for embellishment. To finish it, I glued on a ribbon hanger and a piece of scrapbook paper to tidy up the back. For my final ornament, I'm taking a thin wood round and some wire to create a birdcage. I started by poking 8 holes in the round with a sharp awl. I then cut 8 pieces of wire about 10 to 12 inches long and curled one end of the wire. I fed the wire up from the bottom so the curled part was underneath. Once I had all the wire on, I cut another piece of wire about 5 inches long and made a loop with it for the hanger. I put the loop in the center of the wire bundle and wrapped the loop's tails around the entire thing 2 to 3 times and then curled the ends. Next, I curled all of the wire ends and then fluffed out the sides to resemble a cage. I then gave it a coat of black spray paint. I know you're thinking, why didn't I just use black wire to begin with? Well, I would have, but Hobby Lobby didn't have black wire in the gauge that I was looking for. All of the black wire that they had in stock was just way too thin. Next, I added a black bird that I purchased at Michael's along with a little bit of Spanish moss. To finish it, I added a bit of gold antique paste to the wire along with a piece of cardstock that says Nevermore that I printed from my computer. I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed these spooky projects, and I'll see you in the next video.